I mean, what am I going to do? Tell Jesus no? He's holding out his hand for me. So I grab his hand. As soon as I grabbed his hand, we were standing on this hill, this grassy hill. Everything in front of me is white, like blinding white, solid white. And I look down. I'm still wearing my hospital gown. I have bare feet, and I'm standing on this grass. It's the most beautiful grass I've ever seen, dark, dark green. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass touching my feet. I knew the number of blades of grass that were touching my feet instantly. It was amazing. And I'm looking around, and then everything is like so white, but I'm still holding the hand of Jesus. And there's this like a round shape that appears. It almost looked like a big giant pearl. It's about the size of a basketball, but it's way off in the distance. And it's whiter than the rest of the white, but it's kind of shimmering. And it's pearlescent. It looked like a giant pearl.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Bagnaschi with Deep Believer. I am super excited about our interview today. Our guest died when his appendix burst. Now, when he died, Jesus himself in the flesh walked into his hospital room, after which, when he touched him, he was instantly in heaven. But he recovered. When he recovered, he got pneumonia and had a 3-hour conversation with Jesus in his hospital room. This interview is going to be so insightful. It's going to make your heart leap. You will say, come on, stay until the very end. Mike McKinsey, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer.
On Mike. All right. So, Mike, I want to start. You're a believer in Jesus Christ, but how did you look growing up? Were you always a believer? Was your family believers? How did your life look like?
My mom was a believer. My dad was kind of on the fence. He worked swing shift. He was a cop, so he didn't get to go to church much. But mom always dragged me and my two sisters downtown to the church. But it didn't really mean a lot to me. I was a kid. I was just taking it in one ear and out the other. But I did pray as a kid. But yeah, it just didn't. I don't know. It just didn't resonate. It didn't lead my life. I didn't feel called to become a believer in Jesus. I kind of believed it, but I just didn't really give it a lot of thought either.
So you weren't a real believer. You just knew that he existed. He died on the cross and rose again, but it was nothing
Yeah.
like substantial for you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I heard the stories, and I thought, well, that sounds like okay, maybe not. I don't know. I just didn't really take it seriously. Okay, mom said God made heaven and God made earth, and it makes sense, I guess, but didn't think about it much.
Okay, so when did you actually get serious? I mean, was it before this incident happened where you literally died, or did it take you dying in order to realize Jesus was actually real?
I think I mean, to have a deep conviction and to start a relationship with Jesus, it took dying. It took the NDE. Before then, I mean, I have four kids. We took them to church because I thought church is a good thing for kids. But I always describe myself as just a Sunday Christian. Sunday school and church is something you do on Sunday morning. You take the kids, you go, you have a little fellowship, you learn a little bit, and then you go home and watch football games. That was it. I was more worldly than being a Christian. Prayer life wasn't, you know, great. I mean, every once in a while I'd ask for prayer. Somebody gets sick, that kind of thing. But I was just a Sunday Christian, just kind of going through life.
So would you consider yourself as being at the time born again, or were you just religious?
I was baptized before my near-death experience. So if somebody said, "Were you saved?" I'd say, "Yeah, sure. Of course I'm saved." But I still didn't have the deep conviction. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. So, I honestly don't know when I was saved. I mean, it could have been during the NDE because I came out of there and I said, "Okay, I'm going to become a disciple, you know?
Wow.
Yeah,
Amen. All right, so take us there. So the year is 2004,
right.
and your son gets married, but right before then, you're playing baseball with your son. What happened? Take us there.
Yeah, we were so the wedding was about 5 hours away from our house. We got there on a Wednesday, and the wedding was going to be on a Saturday. And so I was playing baseball with my two other boys in the park, playing some wiffle ball home run derby. They were really into baseball, so they go 5 hours away from home. They're going to bring their baseball bats and balls, and we just had a blast. We played for a couple hours, and then that night I started getting sick, and I thought, great, getting the flu, because I wasn't, it just didn't seem like anything serious. Thursday, I got sicker, and then Friday, we had the rehearsal dinner to go to, and I was really sick by then. I was running a pretty high fever. Um, and I just thought, oh, boy, I might have to go get checked out, go to the hospital or something. But I waited until after the wedding to do that because I just didn't want to be a distraction.
And that makes a lot of sense because one, I'm sure you wanted to be there. Um,
Yeah,
so you wouldn't miss your son's wedding. So before then, though, when you were playing baseball with your son on Wednesday before the wedding, that's when they say your appendix burst, but or ruptured. Did you feel anything at the moment when it did rupture?
it's so weird. I didn't feel anything. That night, I started feeling sick. And before that, like when we were playing baseball, I didn't feel a thing. I mean, I never had, they always say you get point tenderness with appendicitis. Even before that, if it was, inflamed or whatever, I felt fine. It was really a strange case. Didn't feel anything.
Sounds like the devil wanted to take you out quickly and quietly. All
Sure
right.
did.
All right. So, right after the wedding, you head to the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. So that as soon as the reception was kind of winding down, my kids came to me and they said, "Hey, we're going to go open presents over at his new bride's house. Her parents lived there. They had a great big house, and so they invited everybody over, kind of keep the party going." And I said, "Guys, I got to go get checked out because by then, so Friday night before the wedding, I didn't sleep at all. Like I was so sick and just I was miserable. I went and got some Tylenol and some Pepto, and I thought that'll fix it, get me ready for the wedding. Didn't sleep one wink. So I was exhausted. I mean, been up for at least 24 hours. So they went out and, took the presents over to the parents' house, and I went to the hospital. And she finally calls me back into the nurse's station. They lay me down, and she's listening to all these uh, symptoms that I had. And she says, "Well, it sounds like your appendix." And I said, "No." Here I'm arguing with the nurse. "No, I just got the flu. Just give me something. I'll go home and I'll be fine." She says, "No, no, this sounds like your appendix." So she does this weird test. She takes out one of those mallets that they thump your knees with to check your reflexes, and she taps the bottom of my foot while I'm laying down on my back. And she says, "Does that hurt?" And I said, "No." I'm just thinking this is kind of weird. She tapped the other foot, and I had pain in my abdomen that made me scream. And she goes, "Okay, that's your appendix. They probably ruptured. I'm going to call in a surgeon." And then she says, "Have you done any unusual physical activity lately?" And I'm thinking back, and I go, "Well, I played baseball in the park with my kids on Saturday, on Wednesday." And she goes, "Wednesday?" Like her expression completely changed. She goes, "Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. This is over 3 days. If they ruptured on Wednesday, I'm in trouble." She says, "I'm going to call in a surgeon." So they did. And then they wheel me down the hall after I met with the surgeon. He says, "Let's get you back there real quick." They pop open the doors. They help me over onto the surgical table. And it was freezing cold in there for one thing. And the table was so skinny, I was afraid my arms were going to fall. So I'm looking someplace to put my hands. And I kind of fold them across my chest. And before they put a mask on or before they put anything in the IV, I look to my right and Jesus walks through the surgical doors like the physical person of Jesus.
Wow. Really quickly, there are some people watching and maybe wondering what were the symptoms you had before?
I was just really sick, like a terrible flu. I wasn't, I mean, I didn't have the typical symptoms. Like I've said, the point tenderness, I didn't have that. I just thought I had the flu. I just felt so sick and miserable that I thought something must be wrong. In fact, my son's in the medical field, and he asked me about the night before. He asked me if I had my appendix. I said no. I mean, I do still have my appendix. And he goes, well, what about like maybe did you eat something weird? I mean, have you been able to go to the bathroom? And I said, no. And he goes, well, maybe you got some kind of blockage or something. We're going through all these theories. And I said, honestly, I just think I've got the flu. I'm just miserable. So it
Wow.
wasn't the flu.
Wasn't the flu. All right.
No.
So now you are in the operating room, a cold operating room on a skinny table, and you're like, I have to keep my arms up. Next thing you know, you literally see the Son of God walk through the room. Was he in the flesh? Did he look like a spirit? What did Jesus look like?
He looked like, in fact, I had to do almost a double take because I thought, oh, the surgeon's here. Wait a minute, that's not the surgeon. That's Jesus. And the funny thing is, everybody wants to know what did Jesus look like? That's the first question I always get when I tell somebody, what did Jesus look like? And I have to say, Jesus looked nothing like what I had been shown as a kid. A kid, me growing up in North America, I was always shown a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. And I thought, but, and people go, you're an idiot if you think he was blonde hair, blue. He lived in Israel, right? But I'm like, well, I was a kid when I was shown that. I didn't question it. I just didn't really think about it because it didn't really matter to me, first of all. But when I looked at him, I looked into his eyes, and when his eyes looked into mine, he looked into my soul. He had darker skin than what I thought than what I've been shown. His hair was dark brown. It was kind of wavy, a little past his shoulders. He had a short beard, and his eyes were like this bluish green, more green than blue. And I mean, I just looked at him. Instantly, I knew it was Jesus. There's no doubt. When the Savior of the world stands in front of you, you're going to know, whether he looks like what you've been shown or not. But it was it was stunning. And he holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer. And now I'm still thinking like I'm still in my body. I'm not floating away. This is a physical one-on-one talk with Jesus. He says, I want to answer your prayer. And he holds out his hand. And I'm thinking, my prayer, the last prayer that I said was, hope, guide the surgeon's hand and let me get out of here with, minimal damage and let me get home quick to my kids, that kind of thing. So I'm confused, and I just thought, whatever my prayer is, I mean, what am I going to do? Tell Jesus no? He's holding out his hand for me, so I grab his hand. As soon as I grabbed his hand, we were standing on this hill, this grassy hill. Everything in front of me is white, like blinding white, solid white. And I look down. I'm still wearing my hospital gown. I have bare feet, and I'm standing on this grass. It's the most beautiful grass I've ever seen, dark, dark green. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass touching my feet. I knew the number of blades of grass that were touching my feet instantly. It was amazing. And I'm looking around, and then everything is like so white, but I'm still holding the hand of Jesus. And there's this like a round shape that appears. It almost looked like a big giant pearl. It's about the size of a basketball, but it's way off in the distance. And it's whiter than the rest of the white, but it's kind of shimmering. And it's pearlescent. It looked like a giant pearl. And this thing starts sending out these fluorescent tubes. They look like fluorescent lighting tubes, like you put in your kitchen or your shop, those big long skinny things. But these things were a couple of feet long and they were smooth on the end. And I'm seeing a couple of them go by. They start out going pretty slow and they're zipping by my face. One of them actually hit me in the head. And as it did, it went through me. And when it did, it made this light buzzing sound and it warmed me right down to my toes. It was the most amazing feeling. And then as I'm trying to adjust my eyes to the white, it's like somebody pulled the curtain from my right to my left because now that white just goes all the way from my right to my left and it opens up and I can see this beautiful scenery. Now I'm looking down, the grass gives way to these little flowers. They look like they're dancing in the wind, but there's no wind. They're pastel colors. They're real pretty and they're just all like moving. And then at the bottom of that hill is this huge city. Like it's got to be a mile across. In the middle of it is this big giant golden dome. There's a couple other golden domes that are scattered around the city. Most of the roofs were white, but there were some that were like almost pastel colors, like oranges. Um, but there were a lot of roofs that looked like church steeples, but they didn't have crosses at the top, and I thought that was weird. So I live in the South, and we have like millions of churches here, and they all have crosses on the top of the steeples, and so that kind of caught my eye, and I thought, well, that's weird. Um, but then on the other side of the city, there's this huge mountain, and the mountain is covered with pine trees. Like they're perfectly shaped, beautiful, huge pine trees. But instead of needles, they have like these lacy little, uh, like dainty little needles. And they're all sort of moving a little bit, almost like the wind is over there too, but they're not really. I can't feel any wind. And then one of those, oh, and then at the top of that is the sky. And it's the most beautiful colors that I've ever seen. It's like a sunset, like a very vivid sunset with reds at the bottom and oranges and yellows, and then at the top it's like blues and greens. Uh, but I notice there's no sun, but it's that color, and it's just like the colors are so vivid. It's almost blinding. Like I just kept looking at this, thinking, man, this is incredible. The beauty of this thing. And now oh, and then so that white curtain that got pulled aside, that all that white that was in front of me is now settled almost like fog on top of the city. So I can only see the rooftops. I can't see anything below that. I can't see streets or, if there's cars or people, I can't see any of that. All I can see is rooftops. And now those fluorescent tubes that were coming through, like the one that hit me, are going over the city all the way across, and they hit one of them hits the tip of one of those trees, and it's like it had a diamond on it because it just burst into these white fireworks, like pow, white fireworks in front of that colorful sky. It was incredible, and pretty soon more and more of them hit. So it's like there's fireworks going off everywhere. There's these little explosions everywhere, and I look back at where they're coming from, and Jesus looks at me and he says, it's the glory of the Lord. And when he said that, I got, I mean, this is 20 years ago. I still get choked up at that part. When he said that, I got so weak in my knees and just filled with emotion. I couldn't stand. I was unable to stand. And my knees hit the ground. And as soon as my knees hit the ground, they shocked me. They brought me back to life. So now
Wow.
instead of this beautiful scenery, I've got a doctor hanging over me with a mask on. And he says, hey, do you know your name? And I answered him, Mike, but I didn't verbalize. I answered him in my mind. And he asked me again, do you know your name? And then I realized what I did. And my throat was so dry and, I was still so burning hot again, after being so peaceful and, feeling all this love. Um, I said, Mike. And he says, good. Do you know where you are? And now I had to think, well, I was in heaven. I'm pretty sure. I was with Jesus. Uh, But then I had to think, okay, I was in my son's wedding, and then I remembered the city was Ventura. It was Ventura, California. And so I told him Ventura, and he says, okay, good. And he looks at some other people, and then I realized there's other people in the room. There's like 5 or 6 other nurses. They're all wearing blue scrubs. And he says, he's back. And he said, get him up to ICU. And so I spent 4 days in ICU and 12 days in the hospital total. Had a lot of complications, but I survived.
All right. So I'm going to go back a little bit.
Okay.
when you are in heaven or right before you get to heaven, I don't remember which one, you said, Jesus said, I'm here to answer your prayer.
Hmm.
What prayer was Jesus talking about?
That took a while to figure out, but it did come to me while I was in the hospital. It was about a week later. I thought, oh, I know what prayer he's answering. When I was a kid, when I was 5 years old, my grandfather passed away, and we went to his funeral, and it was in this great big Catholic church. It was just this huge, beautiful church. I mean, most beautiful church I'd ever seen at that point. And the priest is up there and he's talking about, that my grandfather, his name was Pete. Pete's in heaven now. He's in a place where there's no more pain, there's no suffering, there's no tears, there's no sadness. And I remember thinking, wow, that sounds really cool, God. Could you show me that? Could you show me heaven? And that kind of became a nightly prayer of mine when I was a kid. God, could you show me heaven? I'd say my nightly prayers. Sometimes mom would come in. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep, that kid prayer, right? And then at the end, I would say, "Oh, and could you show me heaven?" Not knowing what I'm asking them for, because I mean, I didn't want to die to see it, but that was just the nightly prayer. And I prayed that for probably 10 years until I was a teenager. Hey, show me heaven.
And you just forgot about it.
I did, yeah. I mean, I became a teenager and then I had more important things to do than, pray about heaven. I mean, he hadn't answered me then, so probably never going to, so let's just give up on that one. But yeah, 40 years later, he answered it. I forgot about it, but he didn't.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And you just proved that prayers don't expire
No.
because they were still alive and God answered them years down the line when your kids are getting married.
Yes.
Now, you said that you touched Jesus's hand. What did his hand feel like?
It actually felt like a physical person, like I was holding a physical hand. But as soon as I did, it was just instant love, like overwhelming love. Like you just want to just break down and cry. But
Wow.
I held it together, and I thought, well, gotta keep it together here for Jesus.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so did he have a warm hand like humans hand like a human's hand? Do you remember that
Yes.
it was
Yes.
warm?
Yes. Definitely. And people have asked me too about scars. Did you feel the hole in his hand? And I've told a few people, no, I didn't feel a hole in his hand, but they didn't crucify in your hand. They
Uh-huh.
crucified in his wrist, which I didn't realize until later because I'd always seen the pictures of him on the cross with holes in his, with the nail in his hand. But that's not how they did it. And I didn't see a scar because he was wearing a long robe. So he was wearing a white robe with long sleeves. So I didn't see any of that. And I
Okay.
didn't feel it either.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's true, it wasn't his risk. That's how you hang on to, the nail. All right. So, Mike, did you ever figure out what that pearlescent ball was that had straws coming out of it and it popped you in the head? Do you know what it was?
I have no idea. That is, I've been able to, like, in 20 years, I've been able to pick this thing apart and go, okay, that means this, that was this, I had all the answers, but that one particular thing, I have no clue. I mean, when I first saw it, I thought, well, maybe that's the light at the end of the tunnel. They say you go into a tunnel or something. I don't know. Maybe it led somewhere. I don't know. But yeah, that one's a mystery.
That's wild. Okay, so you didn't experience any feel of travel. It was just instantaneously you were in heaven.
Yes. Yep. As soon
Did
as I
you
touched his hand, we were there.
did you know you were dead?
Not at the time, no. No, it never even occurred to me that I had died because I felt alive. I felt I didn't leave my body. I didn't become a spirit. I wasn't looking down at the surgeons, any of that, that stuff that happens to some people didn't happen to me. I just always felt like I was still in my physical body.
And Mike, I hear that a lot. I hear that from people who die and come back. They say when you die, you don't know you're dead yet. So you just because it's so real. So would you
Yeah,
say it's more real than you and I right now? Is it more real or does it feel like a dream?
it was definitely more real because the senses. I mean, the things that you see, there's more vividness to it. The things that, like I said, I knew how many blades of grass were touching my feet. I've walked on grass barefoot, my whole life, and I don't like it, but this was just like, wow, that's amazing. Now, how do I know that right away? Just it was just so physical.
Okay. All right. So you're in heaven. Did it cross your mind that why am I here? Or, is this a piece of earth? Or you just had a knowing that this was heaven? Because what was your mind? Because, like you said, you were in the hospital room. Next thing you know, you're in heaven. Did you wonder, how did I get here? Well, of course, Jesus, but what was the thinking in your brain? As if, like, I'm not on earth anymore, I'm in heaven. Because, like you said, you're still yourself. You're just there.
Yeah. I just never really questioned like where am I? I knew it was heaven. I knew I was looking at heaven. That was pretty obvious. And I just thought Jesus is going to show me this. Um, I didn't think about I was dead while I was there, while I was holding his hand. But when I came back and he said, okay, he's back, I thought, oh shoot, and I saw the nurse putting the crash cart back together. That's when it kind of hit me. I thought, hmm, I think I just died. Wow. And then I was like, well, I know who was with me. I know where I was, and I know what I was looking at. So it all kind of made sense. But um, like the next day, the surgeon came in and he said, yours was the worst case I've ever seen. And I said, well, thank you for saving my life. And he says, yeah, you're welcome. And I was going to tell him about it, and I started crying. Um, and I couldn't talk about it. But I thought, a little later, I had another encounter with Jesus, and I thought when I woke up and I had pneumonia 24 hours later, I thought that's why Jesus showed me heaven, because he wanted me to be comforted, because that's where I'm going. And so it was 24 hours later that it started to all make sense. Like that's why he showed me heaven.
Hmm.
The prayer thing didn't enter my mind yet.
Wow. So it shows Jesus does everything for a reason. I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that. All right. So we're going to get to the conversation you had with Jesus after, or in a minute. But before we get there, though, a few more questions. Now, when you were in heaven, did it look like earth?
It looked like a much more vivid, beautiful, perfect Earth. Yes, it did definitely look like Earth. The city looked like buildings, not buildings from around here. They were beautiful. They were white. The gold ones were just like this spectacular, shiny gold. Um, that's all I could see of the city with the rooftops. But like the trees were more perfect and beautiful, the flowers were beautiful. So those things, it was definitely a reflection of Earth, or Earth was a reflection of heaven, because those things were very familiar. I've heard of people that get tours of heaven. I'm kind of jealous. I wish he would have said, let's go check it out. But the childhood prayer was, show me heaven. It wasn't, take me to heaven and let me meet my grandparents that have passed away. I just stopped at, hey, show me heaven. Okay. So he answered his prayer, or my prayer. Yeah.
Sure did. He sure did, because you did see heaven.
Yeah.
Now, did Jesus stay holding your hand while you're viewing the city?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He never let go until I fell to the ground, till my knees hit the ground. Yeah.
And the next thing you know, once your knees hit the ground, you're back on earth,
Hmm.
and they say you're back, and then you say your name. So you begin to get complications after the surgery. And could you mention what you said earlier? Because a lot of people don't realize the dangers even after a surgery, because you're not quite out the woods yet.
Yeah, actually, I guess that's when most people die from stuff like that. They'll make it through the surgery, and then 24 hours later is the critical time. The doctor explained it to me later. He said, "Yeah, all those germs, they've done their damage, but they create this ball. Mine happened to be a golf ball sized ball in my abdomen." He said the germs get together and they try to finish you off. So I was infected with E. coli for 3.5 days. And that's what happens when your appendix rupture. You get this E. coli that normally leaves your body and everything's fine. And it's not, it's encapsulated, inside your body that can handle that kind of stuff. So the germs get together, they try to finish you off. And that was a kind of a fun ordeal to go through when they had to get that thing out of me. That was interesting. They do it with a big needle the size of a number 2 pencil. And yeah, and they can't go in the front side because you have organs in the way. They have to go through the back side. And there's a whole crazy procedure that goes along with that. I don't think we want to get into that. That was the
No, my
worst.
jaw's like,
That was the worst pain I'd ever been through in my
oh
life.
my gosh, they can't numb the area. Good grief. All right. Deep Believer Ministries have poured into millions worldwide. Powerful testimonies, deep revelations from the Lord, and messages that draw people closer to Jesus Christ. But now we've reached a point where we must grow. We've been blessed with a 1,400 square foot canvas, but right now it's just an empty room. No walls, no floors, nothing but potential, waiting for the Lord to breathe on it. With your help, this bare space becomes a beautiful studio, a space where Jesus is glorified, faith is strengthened, and souls are reached. And just like our first declaration from A Night with the King, your name will be beautifully displayed forever, a replica of the first one, reminding everyone who walks in that you helped build something eternal. You'll receive behind the scenes access, early viewings of our first studio recordings, special live stream access, a studio founder badge, personal thank yous from me, on screen credits, and even a named part of the studio for larger givers. So if God tugs on your heart to be a part of this, simply click on the link that says Help Build Our Studio when you go to www.deepbeliever.com. Together, we will build a home for His glory. That was interesting that your doctor said. You said your doctor said this is the worst case he's ever seen, but
Mhm.
actually, no, it's not. Because what?
Because everybody else that had a worse case died. And he said, and this was the next day as he's poking around checking my stitches. He says, yours is the worst case I've ever seen where the patient lived. And he said, you shouldn't be here. And then he actually said to me, God is not done with you yet.
Look at God.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you develop pneumonia. This is the fun part. We're even more fun than the heaven part. All right,
Yes.
so you got pneumonia,
Yeah.
and what happened after you got pneumonia, Mike?
So 24 hours after surgery, I wake up. It's 2 in the morning. I've got a clock right above on the wall in front of me, so I'm staring at it. I wake up at 2 in the morning and I can't breathe. I mean, I feel this water vapor in my lungs and I'm kind of choking trying to breathe. So I had the call button. I was so weak I couldn't pick my hands up off my chest, but the night before when the nurses let me go to sleep, they put the call button on my chest and wrapped my hands around it. So I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I realize I'm in trouble. I can't breathe. And so I pushed the button and I told the lady, I said, I can't breathe. And so the nurse comes in, she puts a stethoscope up to my chest and she says, and I'll never forget her words, "Oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia." And I thought, oh boy, that's why Jesus took me to heaven because I'm going to die. There's no way. I was so weak and just so hot still and running, a fever, but I was so weak. I thought that's why he showed me heaven because that's where I'm going. I'm not going to make it. I just waited too long to go to the hospital. And so she calls in like four other nurses. They they checked my temperature. It was over 104. So they take an ice blanket, they pack me in ice, and they give me oxygen blowing directly into my nose to try and clear my lungs. And then she hands me this thing, they call it a spirometer it's got like a thing that you can blow into like a straw, and then there's a tube with a marble in it with numbers on the sides, and you have to blow in it and make the marble move up the tube. And she says, I want you to do this 10 times an hour. And she says, give it a try now. And of course, I try to blow, and the little marble wouldn't move at all. I mean, it was like stuck to the bottom. I couldn't move it at all. And she goes, just keep trying. It'll get better. Just keep trying. So she sits down next to my bed. And then I feel this holy presence enter my hospital room. And I just knew Jesus was back. Now, this time I couldn't see him, but I knew that he came into the hospital room and he sat down at the end of my bed, like almost next to the nurse. And I hear him say in an audible voice, Michael. And I'm like, what? And I look over at the nurse and I said, did you say something? She says, no, no, honey, just try and breathe into your spirometer again. And so I try to breathe, marble doesn't move. And I hear Jesus again, Michael. And I said, yes. And he says, I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions, so you could hear me. And I look over at the nurse and I said, did you say something? And she says, no. And I'm like, okay, this is really getting weird. Jesus is here. I hear his audible voice like he's talking to me at the end of my bed. And he says, I've chosen you to do more for my kingdom. And I start talking to him and I'm looking at the nurse as I'm giving him an answer, and she doesn't hear anything. She doesn't hear Jesus. She doesn't hear me. So I don't know what's going on. But one of the first things I said to him was, are you really here? Is this really happening? Are you really here? And I ended up having a 3 hour conversation with him, and I swear 2 hours of of that conversation was me saying, "Is this really happening? Are you really here?" And he kind of got perturbed after I kept asking him that, and he was like, "Yes, yes, Michael, I'm here." And you could just tell the tone of voice changed from, I'm real patient to, like, will you just shut up and listen? Because I just kept saying, this can't be happening. This is just too weird. This can't be happening. I'm hallucinating or something. And I've heard that and what's funny, this whole thing, like the 3 hour conversation, for the longest time, I didn't tell anybody about that part because when I got home from the hospital, I spent 12 days in the hospital. I lost 35 pounds in 12 days. I came home and a couple of my friends came over, one at a time. They'd sit down on the couch with me and I would tell them about the NDE, and then I'd be crying and they would be crying and holding my hand. These are 45, 50-year-old men holding my hand and crying with me. And then when I got to the part where I said, you're not going to believe it, but Jesus came back 24 hours later and I talked to him for 3 hours. And they looked at me like, their expression went from, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard to, dude, you're crazy, And I thought, I, I have to, I mean, what am I going to do? I have to tell the truth. I have to tell the whole story. And after about the fifth or sixth person that I told that to, I heard Jesus whisper in my ear, you don't have to tell this part yet. So I was like, thank you. So I just shut up about that part because people thought I was crazy. I had a high paying job. I was a superintendent for a real estate development company. I didn't want them firing me because I had brain damage, or thinking I'm nuts. I mean, that was a real situation. And I just thought, okay, I'm just not going to tell that part because they were okay with the NDE part until I got to the part where I said, Jesus came back. So I stopped telling that.
That's so odd because once you said Jesus took you to heaven and he was with you, it's so weird that they would stop believing that he came back. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I thought it was unusual, but I was almost relieved. And maybe that was just for me more than them. But one of the things that he said to me later, and this was 20 years later, after I had told a couple people on podcasts, I read the comments, and one of the comments said, you just had a high temperature hallucination. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You know, okay, if it was a hallucination, I mean, I've never known a hallucination that could transport you somewhere and be a physical, place and time and all that. That didn't make sense. But I understand why they said that. But then when I thought he showed up later and an hour after he sat down, they checked my temperature and it was 100. It was like 100.2. So I'm like, well, that's not. high enough to cause a hallucination. And that's when I heard Jesus in an audible voice say to me, tell your whole story. Now's the time. Hold nothing back. The world is ready, and so are you. And so that's when I thought, okay, I'm gonna, you know, I mean, I would always ask him, what am I supposed to do? Write a book? I mean, is that how I'm gonna reach millions? So I did. I wrote a book with everything in it, just figuring, okay, now's the time. He said, I'm ready. And I was, and it's funny because I think I wasn't ready to defend Jesus 20 years ago when this thing first happened. I mean, not to strangers. I wasn't going to go out and tell my story. I mean, I didn't like talking to big crowds or, you know, I didn't like talking about Jesus at all. I just wasn't comfortable with it. So he got me ready.
How long ago did Jesus come and ask you or tell you now is the time?
That was almost a year ago.
Almost a year ago.
Yeah.
So timing is everything. So God does things in perfect timing. And if
Yep.
you would have done it 21 years ago, that would have been too soon. The time just wasn't right. And we're going to get into that now because timing is actually perfect because of what the Lord said to you. But before we get there, why do you think Jesus hid himself the second time? Because you heard his voice,
Yeah.
you didn't see him.
I think that it was probably the fact that I was in the physical realm now. I wasn't in heaven. Um, I don't know. Maybe it's because the nurse would have done something. I don't know. It was so weird. Like I knew he was there, and I could hear every word. He could hear me, but and it was like a audible voice too. So I'm not sure why.
Yeah. What did his voice sound like?
Mm, it was authoritative. I actually had somebody asked me the other day, "Hey, what if you hear an actor that sounds like Jesus, let me know what that actor's name is." And I've never been able to replicate his voice. It's like a father, brother that I don't have, that I've never had. But it was authoritative, and when he speaks to me, it's always just a few words. It's not like we're talking, he'll say something like, "Hey, big changes are coming," and then I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? Big changes are coming," and I'm like, "Okay, well, are they going to be good or bad?" Well, good in the bad in the interim, good in the long run. Just quick stuff like that, But I hear his audible voice quite often. Well, I
Yeah.
should say a couple dozen times I've heard it.
So is his voice masculine?
Yes.
Mhm. All right. So let's talk about the conversation. It was 3 hours long. So you said
Yeah.
Jesus, he doesn't talk a whole lot, I guess, but when he speaks, is very impactful. So tell me about your conversation. What did you guys talk about?
So, like I've said, about 2 hours of it was me saying, "Is this really real? Is this really happening?" And that's not an exaggeration because I kept asking him. But he said, "I'm calling you out to do more for my kingdom. Our story," and he always called it our story, is going to be heard by millions, which actually has happened. Um, and he said, "But I need to warn you that when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack." And I was like, "Okay, that's scary. What are you talking about?" And he would just wait and pause and let me think about it for a little bit. And I'd have to ask him a couple times, "What are you talking about? You created me. You know my mind. You know what's going to satisfy my mind. I need to know, what am I in for? What's going to happen?" And he would never give me specifics. He would just say, "You have some valleys to go through." He always called the bad stuff the valleys. And so, like, when bad stuff would happen to me, I think, "Oh, that's what Jesus was talking about." But he did say, "Just know that I'll be with you. I'll be walking with you through those valleys, and I'll give you strength." And so, when my dad passed away suddenly, I mean, he wasn't very old. I would think, that's one of the valleys that Jesus was talking about. Yeah, it hurts, but I really could feel it's like his arm was around me, holding me up, getting me through those tough times.
What else did he say?
Uh, Geez, a lot of it was, the valleys that I'm going to walk through, different things. He said that don't even try to comprehend it because I have an earthly perspective, that I don't have God's perspective. You can't see the ramifications of what's going on in your life. You don't know, like the ripple effect of what's happening. You know, like like me talking to you, thousands of people are going to hear this, but we don't know who they're going to talk to about it and who those people are going to talk to those people, the ripple effect, how far our conversation could possibly go. I mean, you just never know. Generation after generation, it could it could just keep going. So that was one of the biggest things that I think the biggest impact on me was man, this thing could be big. And I would ask him, well, what am I supposed to do? Write a book? I mean, am I supposed to become a speaker? What am I supposed to do? And you think about 20 years ago, YouTube was like all music videos. There were no NDE channels. There was nobody talking about this kind of stuff. So when he said later, 20 years down the road, the world is ready, he prepared the world and all this stuff to get his word out to, massive amounts of people.
When you said that Jesus said he talked about the valley, how you're gonna experience valleys. Did you think of Psalm 93?
I did, yeah, because it was a little scary. Yeah, the valley of death. That's kind of what I thought, People around me are going to die. I just pictured, I actually pictured my kids. And I thought, no, you can't let anything happen to my kids. And it didn't. I mean, it didn't he wasn't talking about my kids. But everybody experiences death in their lifetime. And that's kind of when we really need to lean on the Lord. And I certainly did. And I got comfort from him. There's no doubt.
When you were in the valleys, though, Jesus said he would be with you, but were there times when you felt like he wasn't there?
Um, yeah, like when I would first get the news, like I find out dad passed away or my mom died or my sister was killed. Um, yeah, there's certainly times when I thought, wow, where are you? How could you let this happen? And then I just would think, okay, I just need to pray. And I would just feel that comfort.
Wow. Wow. So how did Jesus end the conversation with you?
It's funny you would ask that because the last thing he said was, let's keep in touch.
Oh, I love it.
Like
Like a phone
it's just
call.
like it's like my best buddy. Hey, let's keep in touch.
Oh, wow. Have you kept in touch?
Yes, I have.
I love that. Okay, so you said that you hear his voice audibly sometimes. So you still do. When was the
Yes.
last time you heard his voice?
Okay, you may laugh at this story, but the last time I heard it, he told me where a screwdriver was. Yeah, I think, a lot of times we just call on Jesus when there's something big happening, something bad going on, but he wants to be involved in every little detail. So there was this one time where I'm walking around my house. We're renovating a big giant house in Tennessee, and I was so frustrated because I hadn't moved in yet, but I had like one screwdriver there. I had one saw, one of everything, and I needed this certain screwdriver and I couldn't find it. I'm running all over the place looking for it. And I finally just cried out and I said, God, I need to find this screwdriver. Can you please help me find it? And I hear him say in an audible voice, it's in your truck. And I said, and this is how frustrated I was. I go, it's not in my truck, because I thought I just used it yesterday. It's not in my truck. I don't take my tools home. So just to please him, I walk out to my truck like a little kid, and I look in the window and I go, it's not in there. And I come back and I thought, okay, Mike, you need to settle down. You need to just chill a little bit. So I thought, yeah, okay, it's noon. I'm gonna eat my sandwich. I had a sandwich packed in this little ice chest. I take out the sandwich and I start eating it. And as I take a bite, it's like there was this movie screen that popped up in front of my face. And it's a movie of me working yesterday in this same house. And I'm using a screwdriver. And I see myself using a screwdriver. And I go, well, that's interesting. I mean, there's the screwdriver. What'd you do with it, you dummy? It's got to be here somewhere. So I see myself, I'm standing on a ladder and I put it in my pocket to get down off the ladder. I get down off the ladder and now it fast forwards to me getting into my truck to go home at night. And I sat down and it's like I'm looking through the passenger side window at myself sitting down. And the screwdriver poked me and I took it out of my pocket and I opened my center console and I dropped the screwdriver in there and I closed it up. And so I thought, oh, shoot. Yeah, he's right. It's in my truck. So I walk out to the truck. I pick up the screwdriver. I pick up the center console, and there it is, the screwdriver, exact screwdriver I needed. I walk back inside, and I just said a prayer. I said, "Hey, I'm sorry. You tried to help me, and I didn't listen. And it's not like me not to listen, but I'm sorry."
So Jesus brought his receipts. So you said it's not in there. So you basically told God, you're wrong, but you said, I'll just please you anyway.
Yeah,
And he actually showed you literally yourself
yeah,
what you did with it the day before. So it
yeah,
was, yeah.
exactly.
So did you remember it? So once you saw it, did you remember all that happened?
Yes. Yeah, I
Okay.
did.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
like, oh, that's right. I did do. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow. See, look at
yeah,
God. So even the tiny things, even a screwdriver, God really does care. He wants to be involved. Uh,
everything.
Mike, so if anyone wants to reach out to you, well, one, let's talk about your book really quickly. You wrote a book, and the book is called I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven. Tell us about the book and where people can find it.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It was actually a bestseller on Amazon a couple months after it was released. I've released it in September. It was a bestseller in three different categories, so I'm pretty proud of it. And thank you for everybody who's supporting it. It's just a deep dive into a lot of the stories that I have, a lot of the things that I just can't cover on a podcast. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of feeling about things that have happened to me. And God, you said He provides receipts. He does, and I have so many stories of that where He'll tell me something, and the next day I'll be like, oh, there's the proof. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And I talk a lot about prayer. Prayer is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. A lot of people will go to God and say, here's what I need, and give Him the list, and then say amen and walk away. And I think we need to just learn to listen for His voice because he does talk back. I mean, for me, I'm lucky. I hear it every now and then audibly, but I hear it all the time in my spirit.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So if they do want to purchase your book, how can they do it?
It's on Amazon. I held the hand of Jesus in heaven, or I have a podcast. I don't have a podcast. I couldn't do that. I have a website, MikeMcKinsey.com. The last name is spelled McKinsey, and it's got all my social links too. So I love hearing from people.
Awesome. And I'm sure they would love to hear from you after this interview. So Mike, could you do us a favor? And I want to thank you so much for this interview. I love it. I love the detail that you included in all of it. You can tell your love for Jesus. And honestly, it's really encouraging just to hear you speak and testify of it because the Lord got you in a place where you weren't even a deep believer. You were just Mike
Right?
playing baseball with his son, going to his son's wedding, and next thing you know, you're walking with Jesus in
Yeah.
heaven. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he'll get you wherever you are. And I love that no matter where you are in life. Mike, could you pray for our audience today, please?
Sure. I'd love to.
Right.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you today for Jennifer and her podcast and the reach that this has. God, I just pray that I can be a mustard seed in somebody's life and have them find you because of the story that you gave us. And I thank you for trusting me with that story. I ask you these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen and amen. Mike McKinsey, thank you so much for joining us on Deep Believer. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony. Honestly, it was a breath of fresh air.
Thank you.
If you'd like to be born again and give your life to Jesus Christ today, pray this prayer with me. Dear Jesus, I admit that I'm a sinner and am lost without you. I'm convinced that you're my only saving grace and my only hope. No longer do I want to do life without you. I believe that you came to earth to die on the cross for my sins, rose from the dead 3 days later, and are coming back for me one day soon. Please come into my heart and be my Lord, Savior, and friend. In Jesus' name, Amen. If you've prayed that prayer, get yourself a Bible and read it daily and ask God to interpret every word for you. Then surround yourself with like-minded believers in Jesus Christ. Congratulations and welcome to the family.